So we have just finished having the talk with one of our kids, and we thought we'd film this very special edition of Real Talk for Parents.
Often we think about the talk, and we even, named it the talk at the start as this once-off thing. But I think it's just really important to think of having these conversations around the human-person relationships, love and sex with your children as ongoing conversations. Now, obviously, I think there's always going to be a point in time where you sit down and talk to your kids specifically about what sex is, which is what we've actually done tonight. But I think to not have this big pressure on this one moment in time where we've got to tell them everything, and if we don't tell them everything, it's all lost, So yeah, just this idea of, I guess, taking the pressure off and recognising that it is an ongoing journey.
Yeah, totally. Someone wise once said it's better to have 60 one-minute talks than one 60-minute talk. And so that's certainly our approach. And we made that clear in tonight's talk that this is an ongoing conversation and that all our kids are always welcome to come to us at any point. And with our first child, when we had the talk, that's exactly what happened. I remember many little conversations in the week that followed, particularly coming to you.
What stood out to me tonight in our chat with this other daughter was the fact that we had already covered so much. As we were reading through a book, we used a book to kind of guide us on the journey. This one, I would say to her, "Oh, you've heard that, haven't you?" So, she obviously knew about the different private parts and what they're called, and she knew about periods at this point. And so I think the idea that you have to cover it all at once is never going to be the case if you have gentle, general conversations with your children throughout their life about, bits and pieces, be it their private parts or be it about love and marriage, be it about how babies are born. Our daughter already knew that, a baby comes out of a mother's vagina, but didn't understand how a baby got in there. So, yeah, I think it's ongoing.
Yeah, I think one of the most helpful quotes that I found in any of these difficult things is a quote from G.K. Chesterton, which says, "If it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly." And I think this talk is definitely worth doing. And so parents, please be encouraged. Guardians, be encouraged. It's just such an important conversation to have to start. Even if you do it really, really poorly, then have a go anyway.
I felt a little bit awkward at times, and when my daughter asked, a question in particular, I giggled, and that's okay. Like, I'm sure there'll be moments that you might feel awkward, whether it be, you're reading a book and it's talking about a man's penis going inside a woman's vagina, or whether it be your daughter or son asking, how does that happen? Or that's really awkward, or that's really weird, or that's really gross or something. It's okay if you feel a bit weird, feel a bit awkward, and it's not, as Paul said, it's not perfect or maybe how you might have expected it to go.
Yeah, totally. So we definitely would say, reframe it not as the talk, but as an ongoing conversation. But you might have a landmark talk like tonight. Take the pressure off. Doesn't have to be perfect. Do the best you can. I think we'll put some resources in the show notes, but using a resource makes it very conversational. And we actually, in our talk, we all took it in turns in reading a page of the book, and that was a great way to get us all involved.
I think it's really important before you have this kind of conversation with one of your children to think about what was the talk or what was my sex education like? Because I think sometimes we can bring our own either negative or maybe positive experiences into it. And so, perhaps your parents didn't talk to you at all. Perhaps you heard just a little bit at school and it was awkward. Perhaps your parents were super awkward when they did talk to you. Perhaps they just handed you a book and said, here you go. I think taking stock of your own experiences so that then doesn't impact too much you in a negative way in how you might present.
Yeah, totally. You don't want to repeat negative experiences if you've had those. I think one of the most beautiful things that we experienced the first time we gave the talk was, you might be able to tell this better, but our daughter coming to Emma somewhere down the track and questioning why other kids talked about sex in a weird or gross way, because they didn't really understand why anyone would talk about sex in a weird or gross way. And, that's such a beautiful opportunity, and we were so privileged that our daughter could think about sex with awe and with reverence. And that may not be the opportunity for many young children. So we realise that's a privilege, and we certainly don't want to bring our wounds and our scars and our bad experiences and put them on our children, because I think that's how it's meant to be. They're meant to see it as the way God intended us to see sex.
Often people will say, well, at what age should I have that conversation with my child? I think it's so individual. It depends on, the child, their maturity, what questions they might be asking, but also what else might they be exposed to. So a child, for example, who might be homeschooled or something, may not be as exposed to as many conversations around these sorts of topics as someone in your average school. And so thinking about who their friends are, do their friends have older siblings? And so they may have already been exposed to some of this stuff. So are they then going to be chatting about that sort of thing with your child at school? So, yeah, I think just taking those sorts of things into consideration. I think for us, we didn't do it super early with our oldest, but I also don't think we left it too late. We really wanted her to hear from us first what sex was, because I think so often, they can hear from kids at school, oh, it's gross, it's dirty, or it's uncomfortable or awkward or yuck, or we wanted her to hear that it is a beautiful thing, a beautiful gift from God that is between a married couple.
Yeah, and more common than not these days, young people are experiencing sex through the media, so through pornography and seeing things online. And that may not even be their own choice. It may be something that pops up or something that someone shows them. I think it's always worth keeping that in mind. The other bit of advice I'd give from my experience of working with lots of parents is the average parents are naive to what their children know or are exposed to. So the average age of exposure to knowledge and exposure to pornography and things like that is just generally a few years earlier than you think it's going to be for your child. So please keep that in mind.
People will often ask, well, where do we start? I think, as we said, for us, we used a book to help guide us, but it could be something as simple as your child's heading towards puberty, and so you begin that conversation with them about what puberty is and what happens inside a woman's body, what happens inside a man's body, and I guess speaking about things like ovulation or erections or something like that then can kind of lead into how babies are made or why our bodies do these things as well. So there could be kind of that practical element. But I think every family is probably going to have their own way of doing things.
I think on that point, there's a couple of things I'd say. The first one is to look for the signs that your child is ready. And for both our children, we saw some signs. And with this particular child that we filmed tonight, that we spoke with, they actually asked, where do babies come from and when can I, have this conversation with you? The other point I'd say is use teachable moments. So, having new life coming into our house is a great opportunity for a teachable moment. But in tonight's conversation, I referred to some gardening that we'd done as a family, and the sort of male flower and the female flower, and how, a fruit was created by the two different genders in the, the birds and the bees, so to speak. So using those teachable moments, whether it be in a car, when something just pops up randomly, whether it be in our life experiences of our family, could be someone you know who's having a baby, or it could be something as simple as how sex plays out in nature. We think it's really important to try to make the child feel comfortable. So for our conversation tonight, we sat on the couch, being on their level. We had some hot chocolate, some snacks, some ice cream. And it's amazing how far that can go to make it just a comfortable and a special occasion.
And I think in the setup, like by setup, I mean like the start of the conversation, we tried to just say, you know, we want this to be comfortable. We want you to feel free to interrupt us at any time, ask us questions. No question's a silly question, you know, those sorts of things, just to make sure that your child, you know, feels at ease and feels like they can basically say anything, and it's a safe space to do that.
So another thing that we think is very important, and most experts who speak on this topic say is just basic and important to do from the very beginning, is to refer to things by their correct anatomical names. And so that made the conversation very easy for us tonight. Our kids, from the time they were infants, from the time they noticed things in the bathtub, we would say penis, vagina, scrotum, these sorts of terms. And a lot of parents, I think, are awkward because of their own experiences and maybe their family of origin and how these topics were dealt with. And that doesn't necessarily help. In fact, it can lead to some complications later in life when kids may need the right language in order to explain things that are going on in their lives. And so definitely a big one is to try to use the correct terms. And if you're not comfortable with the correct terms, try to become comfortable.
Yeah. I think even probably the first time I may have said, you know, to one of our kids, oh, that's a penis or that's a vagina, I probably did feel a bit awkward. I don't feel at all awkward anymore. And they call them those, you know, correct anatomical names. So it's probably very common in our house. We've got boys and girls. But yeah, I think it becomes less awkward as time goes on.
The other thing that we think is really important is to use questions and inquiries to help direct the conversation. The last thing you want to do is go on this big script that you want to say what you want to say when your child is thinking in another complete direction. So in tonight's conversation, we would often say, what do you think sex is? Or what do you know about this topic? Or what would you like to know? It's a great way of gauging what your child knows and understands so that you can pitch your response and the conversation at the right level.
Yeah, exactly. And I think obviously in the way that we did it tonight, we had a book that was, you know, leading us in a lot of ways. But I think this would be the same, even with questions that kids come to you with, be it, hey, Mum, what's sex? Or, you know, what does that word mean? To say to them, oh, where have you heard that before? And do you know anything? Have you heard anything? Did anyone say anything to you about what that was? So those sorts of things, not just in this context of the talk, but yeah, in general, around these topics.
The other thing I'd like to say is that the conversation that we had tonight with our child, we actually recorded, and that's available as part of the Real Talk Parents membership site. So we've recorded that because a number of people asked us to try to model how the conversation actually happens, and there's not much out there. So we've done that. We're going to protect our child's identity, but you can access that at realtalkparents.com.